Hello, seventh grade. Welcome back. Well, I hope you are preparing for your test that is on Friday. Remember that it's an open book test. All right, I want you to look with me today on page 288. 288. This is a Facets of Zoology called Armor of Knights and Arthropods. Armor of Knights and Arthropods. We're going to take a little bit of a zoomed in look at the exoskeleton of arthropods, and how maybe that was similar to the exoskeleton or the armor worn by knights in the Middle Ages. Well, as I do that, I'm going to have you watching something while I talk to you about it. So let me present my screen to you. All right, so you should be able to see now what I see. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this video playing at 1.5 speed, and it's going to be a video of a cricket shedding its exoskeleton. So it's going to go through that whole process. It'll just take a few minutes, but I'm going to let you watch that while I talk to you about an exoskeleton. Okay, so that's a cricket shedding its exoskeleton. All right, well, during the Middle Ages, knights wore heavy suits of armor to protect themselves from swords, arrows, spears, and daggers as they fought their enemies. I'm sure you've seen videos of that before where, you've seen fighting or maybe jousting with these suits of armors. An iron suit of armor usually weighed, how many pounds do you think a suit of armor would weigh? Just what's your guess? Well, they would weigh about 55 pounds. Have you ever tried to pick up one of those 50-pound bags of dog food, maybe at Walmart? The big ones. 50 pounds is a lot of weight. So carrying around 55 pounds of heavy metal, wow, that could really be cumbersome. Well, wearing such a heavy suit of armor greatly restricted a knight's movements. Insects, spiders, crayfish, you remember my crayfish from my aquarium, lobsters, centipedes, and other arthropods have exoskeletons that are much like knights' armor. Arthropods also have many of the same problems with their armor that knights had with theirs. The weight of an arthropod's exoskeleton limits how big it can grow. Most arthropods are only a few centimeters long. The longest living insects are thin tropical stick insects. They can grow up to 33 centimeters. That's 13 inches long. And great owlet moths, which have wingspans up to 36 centimeters. That's 14 inches. Even larger insects existed in the not too distant past. Some fossils have been found of dragonfly-like insects with wingspans up to 28 inches. Other kinds of arthropods sometimes grow up to 61 centimeters, that's 24 inches. But arthropods larger than this can only live in the water. Let's take a time out there and think, why would very large arthropods need to live in the water? What do you think? How does water assist when it comes to weight? Are you heavier or lighter when you're in the water? Have you ever seen people taking water aerobics? Why do you think they do that in the water? Well, they do that in the water because they're lighter in the water and it's easier on the joints. You can move around much easier when water takes off some of that weight. The largest known arthropod is the giant spider crab, which has a 11-foot claw span. The water of deep oceans helps support the weight of these crabs. Joints in the armor allowed knights to bend and twist. Although good armor allowed plenty of movement, a knight's actions were more limited with armor than without. At the knight's elbows, knees, shoulders, neck, and hips, several thin strips of metal connected the large pieces of armor. When the knight moved, These strips would slide over one another or slide apart to lie side by side. These strips were dangerous since cracks between the strips were often the targets of skillfully aimed arrows. Like a knight's armor, the grasshopper's exoskeleton limits its movement, just like the one you see here in this video. For instance, the grasshopper with 7 joints in each of its legs can move them in only a very simple walking or jumping motion. By comparison, humans with their internal skeletons have fewer joints, but can swing their legs quite far backwards, forwards, inwards, and sideways. Knights often had 2 or 3 different suits of armor during their lifetimes. Do you ever think about that? It's true. Young knights whose arms and legs were still growing often found that after a few years they needed to replace their armor with a larger size. If a knight later grew in width, in other words, if he gained weight, he had to be fitted for a third suit of armor. Arthropods solved the problem of growing out of their armor by molting, which is exactly what you're watching now in this video. After an arthropod breaks out of its old exoskeleton, it swallows air or water to stretch its soft exoskeleton to its new size before it hardens. It's sort of like working with concrete. Have you ever worked with concrete? You pour a dry powder into a wheelbarrow or a bucket and you add water. And for a little while, that concrete is like putty. But you better get it where it's going because it's going to harden soon. And once it does, you can't move it. So after an insect molts, like the one you're watching, he's soft for a little while. But he's got to swallow air, in his case it would be air, to make himself stretch so that when it hardens at a larger size. Young, rapidly growing arthropods often molt once every 2 weeks, while adult arthropods may molt only once or twice a year. Armored knights also had problems knowing exactly what was happening around them. Let's cancel that. I'm going to go back to this. I want to show you. Okay. So knights had a hard time seeing what was happening around them. Knights could not hear very well. Since sounds that came through ear holes in their metal helmets were distorted, it was hard for them to tell where sounds were coming from. Holes were cut in the knight's helmet so he could see. But even then, he could only see what was straight in front of him and hardly anything else. A knight in armor who touched something had to feel it through his gauntlet, which is a metal glove. This kept him from feeling quickly whether something was hot, cold, moist, dry, rough, or smooth. In contrast to knights, arthropods have specially designed sensory organs that work perfectly with their exoskeletons. Well, that's because God designed them to have exoskeletons, and we weren't designed that way. Spiders, for example, have up to 8 simple eyes that detect movement. Flies have 2 large compound eyes, which are made of thousands of microscopic squares. With these compound eyes, the fly can see all around without turning its head or moving its eyes. Other arthropods, such as the lobster, have eyes on stalks and can see in different directions by moving those stalks. Most arthropods also have antennae that serve as sensitive feelers and can detect smells. Some arthropods, like grasshoppers, have in their exoskeletons small round membranes that receive sound vibrations and transfer them to their inner ears. Bees and some other arthropods have tiny sensory hairs sticking through their exoskeleton. Special sensory organs allow arthropods to have keen senses in spite of their exoskeleton armor. It's easy to be amazed at the cleverness in the designs of arthropods' exoskeletons and sensory organs, but don't stop there. Be amazed at the infinite creativity of the God who not only designed them, but also fashioned them from nothing. Human engineers often receive fame and glory for a few good designs, but God has billions and billions of designs. All right, let me go back to the full screen. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed taking that little zoom in feature to take a look at the exoskeleton of arthropods and how when we mimic those things, we can't do it as well as God did it. Now, that's going to be all of the new material today. We're going to have a little bit more new material tomorrow, and then we're going to have a test on Friday. I want to remind you, it's an open book test, but be familiar with the section reviews and the chapter review, and then any illustrations or diagrams that are in the chapter. If you are familiar with those, you'll do fine. All right, guys, well, that's it for today. Make sure you look at Google Classroom for your assignment. I'll talk to you later.